All right, so welcome back, everyone. This is going to be the part 2 of our exceptions to Mendel's rules video. When we left off, this screen should be familiar. We were discussing blood types and how we use these eyes to indicate the genotypes, and how different genotypes here, and here can lead to the different phenotypes. And we, depending on where we are in class, you either have worked on these or you will work on these to get more familiar with that type of Punnett square. What we want to do now is talk a little bit about sex-linked traits. So a couple of people have asked me already, does gender play a role? Is gender important in how traits are passed on? And the answer, as most things in science, is complicated. For some instances, gender is important, and for others, it is not. And so getting this sort of starts at the basic idea that all human beings actually have 46 chromosomes. Okay? And of these 46 chromosomes, 23 are from your mother, and 23 are from your father. Because remember, Mendel said every trait has 2 alleles, and 1 allele comes from your mother and 1 allele comes from your father. And so the key learning here is to sort of realize that these alleles are on your chromosomes. So when you get chromosomes from your mother and chromosomes from your father, you have 2 copies of that chromosome, and on those chromosomes are the alleles. So your mother's allele could be different than your father's, or it could be the same, but when they combine, that gives you your 2 copies. So for 44 of these chromosomes, which we call the autosomal chromosomes, this works without a hitch. There's no concerns, there's no problems. Everything we've talked about with the foundations, the simple dominance genetics of Mendel, and the instances where we've talked about our incomplete and co-dominance, it all works exactly how you'd expect. 1 allele from each parent, those alleles interact and they give you simple dominance, incomplete dominance, co-dominance, and that leads from your genotype to your phenotype. But 2 of the chromosomes are known as the sex chromosomes. And those chromosomes are the X and the Y. Obviously, well, we're not actually going to say it. Let's talk a little bit about how X and Y chromosomes combine. So I think everybody can, fairly understand that, that females are XX. So what makes females female is that they have 2 copies of the X chromosome, and males are XY. So what makes males males is that they actually have the X chromosome and the Y chromosome. A couple things about this, all right? It doesn't look like a Y. When you actually look at chromosomes, which we're going to do in the future, it doesn't actually look like a Y. It's just a really small X chromosome, okay? And it's small because it has less info on it, okay? And that's going to become important as we move forward in this. So if I were to do a very basic Punnett square and to cross these 2 things, okay? Here I would take the X from the mother and the X from the father. That leaves me XX. Here I would take the X from the mother and the X from the father. That would give me XX. Here I would take the X from the mother and the Y from the father. That would give me XY. Here I would take the X from the mother and the Y from the father, and that gives me XY. So what this means is that here and here I have females. And here and here I have males. So, no matter what you've been told, what you've heard, whatever, the possibility of having a boy or a girl when reproducing is always 50-50. And you can see it right here in the Punnett square. 50% of those possibilities are female and 50% of those possibilities are male. What this also means is that the father determines the gender. Okay? You can see here that no matter what, the female is giving X or X, and the female is giving X here or here. Whereas the male, if he gives an X, it combines with the female's X to make a girl. If the male gives an X, it combines with the female's X to make a girl. If the male gives a Y, it combines with the female X to make a male. And if the male gives a Y, it combines with the female X to make a male. Okay? So that's the first thing to understand about sex-linked traits. All these alleles are actually on chromosomes, and all of the chromosomes pretty much work how we would expect in terms of what Mendel said for alleles and independent assortment and segregation. But the sex chromosomes are just a little bit different. And then the first thing is they determine your gender. And you can see here in this simple Punnett square of showing you the X chromosome and the XY chromosome that that's how, it's 50% birth rate and that the father determines the gender. But what we also know is that there are some traits on these chromosomes. Okay? Not a lot, because it's just one chromosome, but there are some traits on these chromosomes. And this is a problem because the Y chromosome has less information. And what this does is this creates a situation where males, for some traits, have fewer alleles. Okay. Over here you have a Punnett square. All right. Now on this side of the Punnett square you have the female. Now one of the female's gametes is X big H. All right. And let's say big H means that you have normal blood. Okay. Now this female also has X little h, and little h means you are a hemophiliac. Hemophiliacs are actually, they have a fairly serious problem. Their blood does not clot well. So what that means is that if you have a cut and you expect the cut to stop bleeding, if you're a hemophiliac, it does not do that very well. And so in fact, you could just not stop bleeding from a paper cut. Or if you got a more normal cut, you would have to go to the hospital and get stitches because it just won't stop bleeding. Now, hemophiliac is located on the X chromosome. So what that means is that for females, it works like simple dominance. So this female is big H, little h. She's going to have normal blood. She's not going to have hemophilia as a problem. But what you can see up here is that the male has X big H, so he has one allele for hemophilia. But you'll notice that there is nothing written right here on the Y. And that's because the Y chromosome, all right, has no allele for this trait. And so what you can see down here is that this female right here, she has perfectly normal blood because she has big H, big H. This female right here, big H, little h. So these two parents can't actually have a daughter with hemophilia. But over here what you'll see is that this male has big H and nothing, so he has normal blood because he only has one allele for this trait, so whatever that allele says, that's what he has. And you'll notice here, this boy has hemophilia because he only has one copy of the allele, so he can only get that trait. So what this does is for sex-linked traits, this actually creates situations where the probable outcomes are different. across genders. Okay, that's really important, that they are different across genders. All right, so if I was asking you, about this couple's children, okay, I could tell you that 75% are normal, 25% are hemophiliac. If I was asking you about this couple's daughters, I would tell you that 100% are normal. And if I was telling you about this couple's boys, I would have to tell you that only 50% are normal. And that's a key here when it comes to sex-linked traits, is you have to really think about all of these factors. What is being asked? What are you learning about? Okay? So we just have a couple of other exceptions. All right. The first one is polygenic inheritance. And what this means is that multiple genes combine for one trait. And this actually happens a lot. In fact, a lot of your genes are involved in multiple traits, which is the next exception. But this allows your genes to provide you information for a lot of traits. And what you have right here in this chart is skin color. And what you can see is that over here, if you were recessive for each of these 6 traits, you would have really light skin. And down here, if you are dominant for each of the 6 traits, you have really dark skin. And what happens is, and you can see just by looking at various boxes, depending on which combination of dominant and recessive you have, it creates a gradient of possible colors. And that actually is how we have all the different shades of skin color. And the same thing actually applies to things like human height. This is why humans are not, everybody's below 5'2", and everyone's higher than 6'4", and there's nothing in between. It's because height also works like this, where you have multiple traits leading, or rather combining, to give you one phenotype. So I'm going to add that up here. It's not just one trait, it's one phenotype. And that's polygenic, and that's an easy thing to remember because poly means many. You know that from geometry with many-sided figures. And the last thing we need to think about is pleiotropy. Now, this actually goes hand in hand with polygenic inheritance. But basically what pleiotropy is saying is what's in this diagram, is that you don't have one gene to one trait. All right? Most or many of your genes actually influence several traits, okay? And what this does is this allows you to sort of be efficient. If you have one gene that can influence 5 traits, you can mix that with polygenic inheritance so that one gene can influence 5 traits, or 10 traits, or 15 traits. But you can also have one trait that is a combination of 15 genes. And that allows you to be able to create your multitude of traits with less genes. All right, so multitude of traits with less genes. Okay? So those are the exceptions to Mendel's rules. We'll tell you more about family trees in our next presentation.